Alright, so we're going to re-review Virgin Queen. Now we're going to make it short. We're not going to go over all the crap in it. But I had an impression from back when I remember having played it that this was kind of just a mess and impossible to get your head around. I don't know if that's what I came to as a conclusion after playing it, I think twice, once on video, once not, as far as I can tell, but I'm not positive about these things, was that, you know, there's just too much business going on and everything, and it crowded my head out. But after having played Tanto Monta and Time of Wars recently, both of which are Here I Stand derivatives, both of which are more complex, maybe more complex than Virgin Queen. Tanto Monta certainly is. I think Time of Wars was too. Time of Wars, though, has an issue, which is that its rules are not good. They have a lot of errors in them, and a lot of things that needed to be corrected. And you can look on BGG, and I'm sure also on CSW. There's people asking questions left and right about it, and there's just, you know, it's a problematic production in that sense. But both of them took a more complex view than Here I Stand does, and Virgin Queen also has such a view. And, you know, to be fair, when I played Here I Stand, I think the first time I was kind of stumped in the same way that I have been with all of these. In terms of, oh, how do I deal with all this crap? How do I remember all the different things that are going on? Could say the same about Clash of Sovereigns and Clash of Monarchs. I think Clash of Monarchs probably kind of overwhelmed me when I first played it, and now I play Clash of Sovereigns and I'm like, oh, it kind of overwhelms me. Okay, big deal. I think that those facets to the game, and specifically to Virgin Queen, I think they can be dismissed to a certain extent. That if you're willing to play it a couple of times, you're going to have some feel for the game that allow you to kind of make informed decisions. There's a lot of busyness going on in Virgin Queen, though. A lot of busyness is going on in the others, Tanto Monta and Time of Wars as well, but I feel like it kind of reflects more on what's going on in the game state, on the board, right? Virgin Queen relies a hell of a lot on just points that you can get all over the place from doing weird little things that don't really reflect anything on the board, don't really impact your future play or anything. They're just victory points, right? They may affect your future play in the sense that, like, oh boy, Joe's kind of in the lead now. We better do something about him. But why is he in the lead? Because he rolled well on a scientist, or he rolled well on a marriage, or whatever. You know, there's just sort of these things that don't present themselves as part of the board. Now, I'm a person who very much likes to see the board as the game state. That's where I want to see what's going on. I want to have this visual representation of borders and of conquests, or of the religious conversions or whatever. And I think, you know, that all worked perfectly fine in Here I Stand. And it worked okay on that side in both Tanto Monta and Time of Wars. In both of those, well, Time of Wars had a weird little chart on it too, having to do with the Pauls, if I recall correctly. But in those games, you were primarily dealing with that physical, geographical representation, right? The map. That's what you're really playing on. And in Here I Stand, you are as well. Yes, there's a few points here and there. Virgin Queen adds a whole slew of these, and I don't like that. You may. Especially if you come from, a more abstract and Euro-ish tradition, you may be perfectly happy with, I've collected up some little squares that give me points. Lots of little squares that give me points. And that we're really just more worried about that race of the victory points than anything else. Rather than, trying to reflect the board situation as the largest component of your victory. So that's one big factor. I think one can get their head around those points and make reasonable decisions within that realm. It's not something I particularly enjoy doing, but I found myself able to cope with it better at this point than otherwise. Now, I had to do a lot of rules lookups. That's fine. It's a fairly complex game, but there are, again, like in Tanto Monta, a fair amount of little subsystems going on that you have to keep looking at and dealing with. And maybe I ignored some of them in Here I Stand and they were still there, because I'm thinking piracy was there, but it was kind of something the Turks did, They had to worry about the piracy rules. It's kind of like the religious wars. 2 players had to deal with the religious wars. They concentrated on those. Other players concentrated on the military side more, stuff like that. So it was easy sitting in a single seat to grasp the things that you kind of needed to do, and you didn't really have to know the broader span of the rules. The other biggest factor that I have with this one is it feels like it ends too fucking early. Now, I think that was actually an issue with every single one of them, even Here I Stand, was that it didn't finish out the deck, right? You might not even get to all the different, cards being shuffled into the deck before somebody could declare a victory one way or another. I often compare Coin to Here I Stand, saying, wow, I don't understand why I like Here I Stand but don't like the way Coin comes down to the last card in the game. Like, the very last card that can possibly be played by the way the deck is shuffled, not, the last play of the game. And I think some of it is that Here I Stand ends up ending early, right? Maybe a little too early, but this one felt like it ended way too early. The first time I played it, boom, it was over on turn 1. Okay, I fucked up, and the Spaniards got really kind of lucky in a run of attacks, etc. It might not have gone that easily. The second game that I just played ended on turn 3 with a victory point victory. Like, somebody reached the amount of victory points that you get, I think, for the standard victory, which is, I don't remember which one's which. One victory is you hit 25 points, and one is you hit 5 or more points ahead of the next competing player. The 5 or more points ahead of the next competing player feels just fine. The 25 victory points felt like it hit way too early. And I think a lot of that is there's just all these sources of victory points that kind of can't be taken away from you that you can collect up. And it's, at least to someone who's not incredibly invested in the game, not a terribly, it's not obvious that someone's about ready to win at all in that case. And it actually seems like it would be difficult to have the game go. So there's 5 turns worth of cards in the game. The game is allowed to go 7 turns. Part of me kind of says, oh, shouldn't there be more stuff for those later turns? But another part of me says, nah, the game's going to be over by that point. I think it would be hard for the game to go 4 turns, to go more than 4 turns. And that feels a little wrong. It just feels like your expectations. It may be possible. It may be that playtesting showed that, people who are really invested in the game, etc., can push it out into that 6 or 7 turn in rare circumstances, very rare circumstances. But and maybe that's if they use the cards to hit one another rather than padding their own nest and stuff like that. But it's clearly to your advantage to pad your own nest most of the time, which that seems particularly problematic because the the Protestant player and the English player, I feel, are in a situation where they're going to have a very, very hard time winning in any game that ends like 3 turns or less. And they don't have a lot of levers to pull to make sure that the game lasts longer than that. I know that the Protestants were doing what they could to get on the board, at all. The English certainly could have tried to hurt someone by going to war or staying at war, but it doesn't look like it's to their advantage to do so. And I don't think that would stop everyone. It would just slow down, like they could slow down the French or they could slow down the Spaniards, although the Spaniards is particularly hard for them to go to war with in the early stages of the game. And there are certain mechanisms by which the Dutch and English get victory points, which really aren't going to happen until later in the game. One of them, the Enterprise of England, which is probably more slanted towards Spain, but trying to force Spain to do certain things. Well, if Spain doesn't do those things, England will generate points for, not really being too troubled during Elizabeth's reign. The Dutch revolt, well, it takes a little bit of work to get the Dutch revolt rolling. And if the Spanish really want to stop it, they can. Now, maybe it's not a great idea for them to stop it. That's not clear. And that's part of it is I don't know if the game... I don't see mechanisms that would allow you to slow the game down particularly. So, for example, just going to war doesn't necessarily slow it down because unless you can force everyone to kind of go to war... they can just sort of collect victory points off of artists and scientists and marriages and all that kind of shit, and piracy if either on the rest of the world map or for the Turks within the Mediterranean. And these are points that just can't be taken away from you. So why go to war when you can run up your victory point score without any real risk, as it were? And that just seems like it kind of defeats a couple of the players who aren't in a position to go to war. Again, the Netherlands, well, the Protestant player, who's the Netherlands and the Huguenots, and the English player are really not in a position where they particularly want to be in an actual war. However, maybe they can drive someone else into the Protestants want to be at war, but they don't necessarily have the capability to put themselves on the board so that they can gain the things they want to. And the English really kind of, it doesn't feel like they want to be at war. It feels like they want to be at peace. Like, if you think about how they were in the period, they weren't seeking a war with Spain particularly. They were seeking to prevent Spanish hegemony, They were, supporting the Dutch revolt, etc. But they got out of their war with France. They certainly weren't going to challenge the Holy Roman Empire or the Turks, all of whom could make a run for victory. And the way things went, well, yeah, the French ran away with some very lucky die rolls to get, well, I don't know if they're very lucky, but with some lucky die rolls as well as some good investment to get a lot of victory points that just, didn't really matter. If they had had a huge Huguenot revolt on their hands, well, that would have taken the Netherlands' attention away from the Spaniards, and maybe the Spaniards would have been able to run up a score a little bit better and do other things. In either case, the Holy Roman Empire was on the verge of winning, as far as I could see it, with, I think, what's the domination victory, which is that you end up 5 victory points ahead of someone else. So if France had been unable to generate all the points that they did because they were tied in a war with England, they might have been troubled by that. So it's hard to see how all the pieces kind of fit together in a way that allows this to be a balanced game where, England and the Netherlands have enough time to get the victory, to get to, the kind of point score or position or whatever where they can get victory. So that's a troubling aspect to it. Now that may be a matter of familiarity. It may be that 6 people sitting down to play this game who really, really know it very well and are sharks at the game can manage a balanced game. But to me, that is not the sign of what a good game should be, right? I think that it should present an opportunity for anyone to have a chance of winning at kind of any level, as long as that level is flat across the board. And it feels to me like it would be like, first of all, there are people who have an opportunity to win on turn 1, where others just don't. But also that there are people who are delayed from having any chance of winning if the game ends quickly, and that the game is liable to end quickly, at least with, I'm not going to say completely naive players, even people who've played, like I have, maybe 4 games of this over a decade or whatever. It doesn't feel right to me. Now, I'm trying to think of something else. If I sat down with people who really knew bridge, and I didn't, I would expect to get my ass handed to me. But if I played with a bunch of people who were at the same level as me, I feel like none of us would get to Grand Slam territory. None of us would get to a slam at all. We probably wouldn't get to a bid above about 4. But we would all be about equal, And of course, that's a game where everything's, where everything's kind of symmetrical. And I'm not necessarily expecting that in a game that has an asymmetrical design. But I do feel like someone should be able to say, well, it's obvious to me that I should be doing A, B, and C to delay the game. And I don't feel like that was at all present in this for the nations who have no chance of winning in the first couple turns of the game. I don't know. I say England has no chance to win. Look, they could have gotten a really lucky break in a war and won a military victory, the same way Spain won one. It would be much, much harder for them to do so, though. It looked much more likely that would happen. Well, we saw it happen with Spain. It looked much more likely it would happen with France. England just doesn't have a big army and doesn't have an easy way of getting one. Anyway, out of the whole series, I think this one is my least favorite by far. But I'm at least not hating it the way that I remembered feeling about it after my first couple plays. At this point, I think, I can see at least being able to play the game. I don't know if that was my concern initially. The business is annoying, and it's funny because it's like all that busyness type stuff going on in the game. It doesn't appeal to me, but it also is what drives or drove victory in my most recent my fourth play, I guess, but my second recently, is just, yeah, look at all these victory points I can get without, without accomplishing anything in the game, as far as I'm concerned. Like, it feels like I did nothing, right, with the French. And yeah. So it's still not a pleasant experience to me compared to the others. Even Tanto Monta, which I feel is an overburdened and overblown game in so many ways. Some of it being the rulebook itself, which is like, they went out of their way in that rulebook to duplicate rules in many places. That makes it easier to find the rules, but it also bloats the rulebook tremendously, and it's not always where you think it'll be, but it'll be in one of the places that you think it'll be. You won't. In this one, I had trouble sometimes finding the rule I want. One thing that I do have to say is that the Ed Beach rules all seem to be complete and unambiguous, which is, I guess, kind of a big deal with a game with this much, with the amount of complexity, especially in Tanto Monta, which isn't just him. He I think someone else co-designed it with him. But there is definitely an attempt, a very good attempt to put things together in a good way. Unlike the Time of Wars, which, so many things I looked at and said, how do you cope with this? Had the same problem with Clash of Sovereigns, by the way, which was very much a disappointment because that's Kalinkowski. Clash of Monarchs, I felt, was relatively decent rules, and Clash of Sovereigns was really, 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 really questionable. As to the fifth game of the series, I think there is sort of a fifth game of the series. It might be Wars of Religion. There might be something else that I'm mixing that up with that felt very much like this and very much derived from it, but not to the degree that Time of Wars was. But yeah, this one, I just felt too much like I was playing a Euro and buying victory points, too many times. There's also a fair amount of luck in that. Not that I necessarily disagree with that. I think it's kind of cool to have like, oh, can I get this? Can I get this? But, it's possible for Spain to trigger an event of a revolt in England where they just win the game off of it, And so, yeah, there's stuff that just feels like it's a little too luck dependent. Certainly the generation of victory points feels very heavy on luck. Like, to me, it feels like it should be, I don't know, sort of a wider bell curve than it is. It's a very steep curve where you can get you can get 2 points off of a given scientist or whatever if you roll really, really well. And marriages and stuff, you can collect up the victory points very quickly, and you only need 25 gets you the game. You start with you get a whole bunch just for having your country, sort of, if you're one of the big countries like France, and yet you have lots of victory points available from random die rolls that they just feel a little too random and a lot too much like I'm just buying victory points. I'm buying draws from a victory point deck that could get me lots, could get me shit, and I don't have a lot of control over that. Anyway, I just wanted to give some thoughts at the end of this because I really wanted to look at it. One of the things that I wanted to look at was whether or not this one benefited by being played more like an EU game, a game of EU, which I felt Tanto Monta did get that aid from. I don't think so. I think this one actually is a highly competitive, game, kind of like Here I Stand, and that layer of, oh, I'm just running a country and doing stuff, and the hell with winning and whatever, doesn't really apply. It's just, there's a lot of this busyness going on about like where you get your points from. That's just no fun. So it's actually further along the lines of that highly competitive game, and more along the lines of the highly competitive heavy Euro that is not to my liking at all. All right, send it up. I don't want to chatter too long, and I know I'm out of battery.